Hello, thank you for attending this virtual webinar from UC Berkeley's Terner Center. My name is Tyler Pullen. I'm a graduate student researcher here, as well as a PhD student in the Department of City and Regional Planning at UC Berkeley. I just wanted to let you see who is presenting before starting the presentation today, which is on off-site and industrialized housing construction in California. Some research we've done on the topic and just setting the stage more broadly for conversations on these issues. So in California, the housing demand is not new to anyone. California-wide projections set every 8 years through a process called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation uses population projections and a number of other metrics to set these 8-year goals for housing need for every jurisdiction across the state. Shown here is the level for the last 8-year cycle, which was from 2013 to 2020. Which set a need of nearly 1.2 million units across the 4 income segments presented, from very low income to above moderate income. Shown here in red is the number of units actually permitted in the same time frame in comparison to that projected need. Clearly across all 4 market segments, California came up about 400,000 units short, with a clear mismatch for the income brackets with the highest need in the very low income, but even to the moderate income range. And this has numerous consequences, as we know. More than half of all renter households, not just those in low income brackets, but all renter households, spend more than 30% of their monthly income on rent in California, which is over 6 million households. And many households are not able to find stable housing altogether. In 2020, the count of unhoused individuals was over 160,000, with possibly more in 2021, though an official count wasn't conducted because of the pandemic. Partially due to the undersupply in the last 8 years, the projected need for the next 8 years, so from now until 2028, is more than 1.7 million additional units, which is a more than 50% increase from the previous 8-year projection. And that would require an average of more than 200,000 units produced per year. Suffice to say, this is no small task, and without significant intervention in the processes and policies behind housing development in California, we are unlikely to meet this enormous housing need. Now, a factor here that's important to characterize about what the actual existing housing production looks like, this graphic here shows the split of permitted units over the last 8 years through single and multifamily units in California. Since 2013, single-family housing construction has risen, while multifamily construction has largely stagnated and even been reduced in the last few years. And it's unclear exactly what is driving this trend, but there are likely a few contributors. For one, there has been recent legislation allowing and encouraging the construction of accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, which have proliferated over the state across the last few years. So over 12,000 units were permitted in California in 2019 and 2020 alone, which is definitely a significant chunk of the growth in single-family housing production in the last couple of years. The second major contributor, we think, is that there have been years of sustained and unmet housing demand and a rising cost of construction in dense metropolitan areas like San Francisco Bay Area and Los Angeles. And that can make it more difficult to build the dense urban infill that is often amenable to multifamily construction. And that leads to more development in lower cost and often sprawling areas that do tend to favor single family construction. And then lastly, a number of communities impacted by wildfires in the last few years have destroyed more than 45,000 homes since 2017 alone. And most of those were single family, and that led to a corresponding rise in rapid rebuild market to help displaced residents get rehoused quickly. Again, might help contribute to a rise in single family construction over the last few years in particular. In spite of this trend, we do want to emphasize the need for multifamily housing in metropolitan areas, which is very high and especially crucial if we expect to meet the large housing demand just presented, while also meeting important social, economic, and environmental goals across the state. And this is where Terner Center's interests and expertise have intersected with offsite construction. So a lot of our work has been assessing the broad potential, the progress, and the remaining barriers to offsite construction for affordable housing in particular. And there's been a recent focus in our work on Southern California, but the research has brought us insight and conversations that both apply to that region as well as the state as a whole. And a lot of this has been with targeted stakeholder interviews across a range of perspectives. In particular, we've sought out interviews with developers, both affordable and market rate, architects and general contractors, funders, people at the state and local legislators with and without experience of offsite, to get a sense of both the barriers and potential, both real and perceived, for offsite industrialized construction methods. The important question here is to emphasize why affordable housing might be particularly amenable to offsite construction. And for us, beyond Terner Center's values and mission to expand affordable and supportive housing, there's a few substantive reasons for this overlap. As we saw in the early slides, the need for housing in the affordable end of the market is substantively higher and unmet, which creates an obvious target for companies seeking to enter the market. But additionally, because every delay and increase in hard costs makes it more difficult for affordable projects to be feasible, offsite methods can be a crucial intervention that allow us to stretch the limited subsidy amounts to be able to build more units for the same cost. Also, since offsite methods favor and do benefit from standardization within projects, they do align well with affordable developers that don't specifically prioritize unique or complex architectural features, which can be important for market rate developers where customizability is a high priority. And for permanent supportive housing projects in particular, I should note, these are overwhelmingly studio units, which the size and makeup of which have a high potential to optimize and standardize across units and even projects, which may be favorable for offsite methods. And then lastly, a number of the established and emerging offsite producers in California have a really value-driven leadership, which are intentionally focusing on the market segment that can have the most positive impact and social outcomes. So in California specifically, there are a number of established and still growing players in the offsite industry, with at least 1 to 2 dozen that we've talked to and heard about. And while capacity is very hard to measure, quantify, and estimate across different methods and processes and factory facilities, the collective capacity is at least over 1,000 units per year, which is pretty substantive, but also still relatively new and certainly growing. A few of the more high-level trends across the state. One of the biggest ones is that the majority of producers, offsite producers in California, favor volumetric modular approaches. This is as opposed to flat pack or kit of parts approaches, with a few likely reasons for that. One is that there's a nationwide, but also statewide experience and exposure to the manufactured home or mobile home industry, which shares some degree of knowledge spillover with modular methods and mentalities of building a full housing unit in a factory setting. But also in California in particular, the Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, created a statewide inspection practice and standard that leverages third-party capacity to do inspections of factory-built units in the actual factory itself during assembly, which can officially exempt the factory-built components, such as a modular unit, from local inspection and review. And while there's some inconsistency in the enforcement of that, the policy and approach does offer more advantage for producers that are able to build more of the unit in the factory. Also across the state, there are both single and multifamily markets, as I mentioned and showed in the permitted unit information and graphic, and the modular approaches have favored both. Again, the ADU market is present and growing, but also the rapid rebuild, which really favors fast construction schedules, has also seemed to be commonly targeted by some of the producers in California. And then another important and last important thing to note here is that many of the projects using offsite methods are importing from outside the state, both inside the country, but also beyond the US borders, especially for projects completed and in the pipeline in Southern California. This has been the case, and it's important to note that the state level inspection can be applied to third-party inspectors outside of the state of California, which contributes here and makes that possible. Within and across different regions in California, the popularity in Northern California is certainly greater, both in locally available production, but also projects utilizing offsite methods. This is likely at least partially a factor of the higher housing demand and higher labor costs in Northern California, though they are comparable. But both Northern and Southern California do have a pipeline of projects with at least a couple thousand of units expected to be produced offsite in the next few years. So despite that differential and slight difference in popularity, it's certainly growing across the state. The very rough overview of some of the major benefits as reported by our stakeholder interviews. I'm just going to highlight a few of the brief ones as well as the sort of updated progress that the industry professionals seem to report according to these metrics. The first and often two most common ones, the time savings have been reported as relatively consistent using offsite methods with estimates in the 10 to 40% time savings on construction schedule. Slightly inconsistent, but there are consistent time savings at least. This largely happens because of the parallel on and off-site work. The cost savings related very much to the time savings have been less consistent, partially due to a high learning curve according to professionals. But some projects have reported 5 to 20% cost reductions thanks to off-site methods. But many don't expect that going into the decision to use offsite and generally go in with the expectation that they will be at cost compared to site-built methods. However, it's important to note that many of them think that the true benefits of scale and resulting time and cost savings will be reached when we can actually achieve repeatability across projects, perhaps through standardized units or even building layouts. And many think that the better performance across these two metrics will come with time and experience. The workforce piece is an interesting one that most professionals believe is very possible and important, though no intensive study has been on it. Essentially, factories could offer stable employment and better working conditions for construction laborers than having to travel to whatever site you're working on and save on commute times, as well as increase safety from less fall hazards on site. So far, not many companies or jurisdictions are really internalizing or prioritizing these aspects, instead focusing on the project-specific effects such as time and cost savings, as I mentioned. But this could be a way for offsite to tie in to more rural counties across the state, which may not have as urgent a need for large housing developments, but are serving as the home to increasing proportions of the construction workforce commuting into the dense metropolitan cores to build. And then lastly, the standardization process and ability to keep tighter control on build quality could have great benefits for the actual quality of construction and energy efficiency of the unit when it's built in a factory. This plays out through things like tighter seals and better insulation, more consistent finishes as well. But similarly to other metrics, there have been mixed results reported from stakeholders. Some have said there's been better build quality and some have reported consistency issues. Again, most expect there to be improvement as different stakeholders, including the offsite producers themselves, gain more experience and familiarity. So based on the feedback we've received from many of the folks we've talked to, we grouped the most salient and persistent challenges into these 4 categories. They're very broad, but they operate on several different scales, which affect individual projects, offsite companies as a whole, as well as the industry and policy realm at large that supports housing. Stable work stream, the first one, was reported as the biggest and most fundamental challenge for offsite construction by the folks we talked to. It represents the simple but important reality that real estate development is not factory production. The more consistency and repeatability we can achieve between projects, the more likely we can achieve the benefits of offsite methods. But there will be a somewhat persistent challenge in this regard. The other 3 challenges follow very related themes. Funding refers to the way that housing development finances and subsidies have many programmatic and procedural requirements that don't quite align with offsite production practices and timelines. So for example, there are upfront deposits on the project level that sometimes are not able to be paid or secured by financing for traditional housing projects, as well as for offsite companies. There are just prohibitively high capital costs to start a factory and not as many investors comfortable or familiar with the process to be willing to invest. Workforce development refers really broadly to the need to train and keep a skilled workforce for factory production, especially without alienating local construction trades, where construction downtime for an offsite producer can make it really difficult to meet the operating costs and keep in-factory labor employed without having to let go and or retrain or rehire the workforce after the downturn. And then lastly, and perhaps intuitively, just establishing the education and experience with offsite methods is really important and can hinder adoption if not taken seriously and encouraged earlier rather than later. So this comes not only from developers and architects and GCs and other project stakeholders, but the offsite producers themselves as they seek to meet their own performance goals on a consistent basis. Gaining education and experience and promoting best practices is really important here. So suffice to say, there are a pretty wide variety of challenges to use offsite construction methods for affordable and supportive housing, and the entire stakeholder network of the housing industry can contribute to overcoming these barriers and helping realize the promise. So a few of the top line interventions that we have suggested via different stakeholder groups, more detail can be found in the report, but the high level overview for offsite producers, really just prioritizing the cost savings, which is a major appeal of offsite methods, as well as other performance metrics, and achieving them consistently is a crucial intervention. For funders, aligning and reducing the complexity of the financing mechanisms for housing and the requirements attached to funds that misalign with offsite production is really crucial. And then developers, architects, general contractors, really whole project teams, seeing offsite construction as an opportunity to improve the industry and advance housing production by partnering early and promoting shared learning can be really crucial. And lastly, local and really state government as well. Just anything that can be done to reduce uncertainty in the permitting, approval, and inspection processes to promote or at least allow standardization through offsite methods will be really helpful here. A specific focus on a case study analysis we recently did at Terner Center is a project in San Francisco, 833 Bryant. This is just south of downtown in a neighborhood called South of Market. So it is a 5-over podium, wood-based over concrete building with 146 units of permanent supportive housing for previously unhoused individuals. There's a number of intersecting and overlapping interventions here that were really important for the project's success. For one, the project used a streamlined approval at the local level via state policy. For two, for the second thing is that there is an unencumbered capital provided by a local nonprofit that allowed the project to move forward and not be beholden to some of the specific requirements attached to public subsidies at the local level that allowed the team, as a third intervention, to really optimize the unit design and layout for factory production specifically, and they used a local manufacturer, Factory OS, just across the bay. So compared to similar projects without the same combination of interventions and really emphasizing that these needed to intersect in complementary ways, the project saw 30% time savings and 25% cost savings, which is obviously substantive, but dependent on these multiple intersecting interventions here. So to give you a sense of the continued research we're doing in and around offsite construction, in addition to our existing work, we're also looking at the ways different energy efficient design features and technology can be integrated with factory built processes to make energy efficiency a sort of default way of building and designing for housing. And this, we have projects funded by HUD, as well as some we're pursuing at the state level through EPIC. There is also a project we're doing with the California Air Resources Board on performing a more holistic assessment of the environmental impact at multiple levels for offsite construction projects, as well as the workforce implications that I referenced earlier that need more substantive research to support. We also definitely want to do more analyses to quantify the benefits across projects using offsite housing construction, using detailed analyses and comparisons to get at the quantifiable, measurable benefits that the projects can provide. And then lastly, just doing continued outreach such as this and education around offsite construction, how it can be used and its limitations is really important. And in this regard, there is a DOE-funded program called the Advanced Building Construction Initiative that I'll mention here. They have specifically tried to gather a lot of the stakeholders across the building industry to promote and share resources and knowledge around offsite and other innovative construction approaches. And I would definitely recommend looking them up and getting connected to stay informed on these and other topics. So suffice to say, there are a lot of open and very important questions around offsite construction and housing production more broadly. We think offsite construction is here, that it's here to stay, and that there are important ways it can and should improve in order to help address the urgent need for affordable housing in California and abroad. It is not a silver bullet, but we of course think it is an important tool that we can and should better utilize. So thank you again for attending. And of course, feel free to visit our website, the link here, and sign up for our newsletter so you can get updates on this and other work we do. Thanks again.